So a very happy new year to Laura Dodsworth.
Happy New Year. I'm going to keep saying it till it is happy, by the way.
Well, I'm happy.
Good.
I'm always happy at the start of things, and then we see how it goes by the end of
I
it.
know. I'm fizzing with excitement about things to talk to you about, though, because
Yes.
I've come in with ideas.
Right.
You always whiz over your ideas. Laura, let's talk about this. And then you just mentioned parking fines. Well, boy, could I bang on about parking fines.
Please do. We'll kick off with it then.
But also trains.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get my normal train today because Victoria Station is completely shut.
Yes.
So I get the train to London Bridge,
Right.
fine, but all the timetables changed because there's no Victoria trains. I'm just astonished.
Well,
that
I
an
saw this at the
entire-
weekend, right? They've decided they were doing some works, apparently, which were supposed to stop on the 2nd of January. They're now being extended to the 10th for some unknown reason. And then they added on top of that because of the self-isolation rules, they haven't got enough drivers. So there's no Gatwick Express at all until the 10th of January. So good luck getting to Gatwick. You'd have to take the slow train that goes from London Bridge. And also, everything coming into Victoria doesn't go to Victoria anymore. It stops at sort of, Crawley or somewhere.
It's ridiculous. It
It's
just
mad.
feels really backwards.
And
Here we are, one of the major capital cities in the world,
Right.
and one of the major train stations is shut.
Yeah,
How bizarre.
I know.
How weird.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, so on to one transport disaster to another,
Yeah.
parking fines.
Yeah, go on.
I mean, I just have to say something about this. All these cowboy firms who are trying to fleece people. I've had a couple of fines over the last year, which I thought were really unfair.
Yeah.
One was for parking in the wrong spot, apparently, but the lines on the ground were kind of dark
Oh, yeah.
grey
Right.
on a slightly darker grey surface. And all the signs about where you could park were in really, really small print.
Yeah.
That was fine. And then
And was that a sort of a local council one then?
no, it's one of these cowboy parking firms.
Right.
that-
Parking Eye apparently is one of the worst.
Parking, I've had a little run-in with them, although I have to admit they have just cancelled my charge. But I had to go to the trouble of letters and complaints to get it
And it's
cancelled.
it's a sort of time-consuming thing, isn't it?
It is time consuming, but I think the problem is that the companies that are using these firms, so in my case it was in a Lidl car park,
Right.
I'm a loyal Lidl customer, you know. A lot of people say they think I'm a Waitrose girl. I'm not.
Yeah.
Lidl and Aldi all the way.
Listen, I will buy stuff anywhere. Anywhere I can go that's not particularly busy and is easy to do, that I will do. And there was a new Lidl, I think, that opened up actually near me in southeast London, and I went there and I didn't understand the system because there was no sign that said if you're parking here, what you have to do is get your parking validated before you leave. So I didn't know, so I went and bought a load of stuff, drove away. A week later, I got a bill for 90 quid. Parking fine.
Exactly, and this is the thing. So in the little car park, the signs around the edge are in tiny, tiny prints. Now, if I'd known that there's a very strict time limit, I'd have abided
Right.
by it. Other car parks you go in and it's in big letters, and that's fine. So it just feels a bit like a scam, and it's put me off Lidl.
It is a scam.
So you know,
I mean, I got off that because I showed them my receipt and I said, "Look, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was supposed to do this. I didn't see any sign that told me I had to, scan my ticket in any way, shape, or form."
So the companies that employ firms like parking, I need to be more careful because there's a comeback on their own brand. I now think that Lidl are trying, partly they're so cheap because they're making all this money from parking fines. So it's not good for
The
your
other
trust
thing
in
that's
the
happening,
company.
and this is not necessarily a private company, although sometimes they are run by private companies, I've noticed, particularly in parts of London, they're now bringing in parking restrictions in roads where there weren't any.
Yeah.
So for example, you could park for free in a road, and then suddenly you wake up one morning and they've actually decided to make it. You have to pay to be there, and you have to buy a residence parking permit.
Yeah.
They did this at Edinburgh when I lived up there, and they sold more permits than there were spaces. So having a permit didn't even guarantee you a space.
I know.
Such a rip-off.
I think the thing is that some of the people who are planning these sorts of measures have a really idealistic utopian vision of car-free cities.
Yes.
Now, I'm a writer, but I'm also a photographer, and the last time I had to travel into London for photography work,
Yeah.
it involves me using a car because
Yeah.
I have kit.
Yes.
And with paying for my congestion charges and my parking, I spent over £100
Can't you
just
get one
to
of those
come
big
into
long
London to work.
bikes? You know those bikes that you see people. There's the most ridiculous contraptions being driven around London.
No,
now.
lighting gear is too big and heavy,
Yeah.
and I'm coming in from Surrey,
Yeah.
so no.
So you haven't got
And-
3 days to cycle in.
Well, at some point, maybe I'm just going to be hauling my stuff on the back of a donkey.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think that's what they'd like.
it's very regressive. So people who run small businesses, independent freelancers like me, we do need to use
Yeah.
cars. And this utopian, this vision of a car-free society doesn't work for everybody.
But
It doesn't work for business.
I mean, I drive a lot in London at the moment, just simply because one, it's quite quiet because there's nobody around, but also two, I'm not particularly keen to get on the tube. I'm not particularly keen to get on a bus. you know, because that's where lots of people are who might want to give me Omicron or whatever. So, you know, if I've got a nice car to drive around in, that's fine. But I find myself in parts of London now, and you can't actually work out whether you're allowed to go there or not, because there's a sign that says buses only, bikes only. You know, I actually ended up in a one-way situation. This is a few months ago. I was trying to get to my dentist, and I was in Tottenham Court Road, which apparently now has gone the other. It used to be northbound only. Now it's two-way. And then Gower Street used to be, you know, one way only. Now it's two. And I was like, I ended up going down this road anyway, and it was literally straight ahead, no entry, no right turn, no left turn. I literally had to reverse back out. And I'm like, what's the point of this road?
It's very confusing.
It doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. They keep changing all the driving rules. It just makes it extra confusing.
Yeah.
But anyway, I must apologise. I have taken you on a detour away from the things we were going to talk about.
We were going to talk about, yes. Well,
parking fines, they make me so cross.
Yeah, well, we want to hear from some of the other people who've had those problems as well. So do bring us those calls. I'll tell you what, should we go and have a listen to Keir Starmer just to break the subject matter?
If we must.
New police hubs will be visible in every community. We will introduce a new, tough approach to closing down drug dens with new powers for local police and local authorities.
He obviously hasn't heard that Sadiq Khan wants to legalise cannabis. He's asking for police hubs to be set up.
Oh,
so you can arrest all the people that say, "Oh, but I thought it was okay now to smoke dope."
He's so out of touch. He was just saying.
Sorry, Keir.
He was just saying in the media that the only way to keep schools open is to vaccinate and ventilate and mask.
Yeah, what is this rubbish?
And you know, there was a great piece in the Express the other day from a professor whose name I've forgotten. Apologies to the professor, saying that the infection fatality rate now for COVID is like seasonal flu. It's 10 times less dangerous for 70-year-olds than it was a year ago.
Right.
And for young people, it's so mild that they're more at risk of being run down by a car and killed than they are of dying from COVID. So what is Keir Starmer talking about?
But it's the same as the government's line, isn't it? Because I think I was listening to Nadeem Zahawi the other day on Julia's show, and he said, well, the thing is we need to keep schools open. So we have to keep wearing masks. Well, sorry, I don't see the correlation between the two.
No, it's a logical fallacy. It's not as though the only way to keep schools open is with masks, because the government still hasn't put forward evidence for masks.
Because they don't have it.
Because they don't have it. Yes.
Because you better believe if they did have it, we'd be hearing about it.
What I'd say is that masks have come to represent a whole range of values and signals, and there's still no hard evidence behind them.
No.
So I know from interviewing people from my book, A State of Fear, and also more recently, that masks were supposed to signal various things. In fact, if you listened to an interview with David Halpin, who's the head of the government's nudge unit in a select committee last year, he talked about masks being a signal.
Yeah.
Professor Neil Ferguson has said something similar about them. The idea is it keeps alive this idea that we need to be careful.
It makes you remember there's a pandemic, doesn't it?
And in a way, therefore, they kind of symbolise fear. They're keeping fear in our face, literally.
And more children I'm hearing about. I mean, we've got a story this morning about many, many more children suffering from eating disorders. But I also hear, and this is anecdotal information from friends of mine, parents that I know who have told me stories about their own children or friends' children who are really anxious and who don't, are scared to go out, don't necessarily want to go back to school, don't want to go back to school and have to wear a mask because they think it might be dangerous. The effect of all of this is so detrimental to children's health.
Oh my goodness, so much. I mean, I've got teenage sons and I don't want to talk about the impact on them. They'd kill me. But I think there's a real kind of cultural divide almost among young people.
Totally.
You get the young people who don't care, who they kind of see the level of danger to themselves for what it is, and I'd say they have a more proportionate response now. And then there are some that are really frightened. I know of a teenage boy who can't leave the house anymore because he's got OCDs. He's really neurotic about it. What we've done to young people is unforgivable. I'm actually really angry in this case with the teaching unions, because you get this sense that they're the ones who are really forcing this measure that we're masking back in schools again, because there is no evidence. Boris Johnson himself said last year that the idea of wearing a mask in a classroom is nonsensical.
Right.
I mean, it's completely self-evident. Of course, wearing a mask is going to interfere with communication, development. I know that's a bit less important
and
as they're
that's
older,
aside
but
from whatever sort of physical problem you might develop, because it can't be good for your skin, it can't be good for your oral health, for want of a better phrase. It's not good for you.
No.
to cover your face up. It's like asking somebody to sleep face down in a pillow for 8 hours, isn't it?
I just can't believe that we're expecting our young people, the next generation, the people we should be doing everything to protect and help, to wear masks all day in schools. There's a campaigning group, Us for Them, and they're asking MPs to wear a mask for 8 hours a day in solidarity with children. I actually don't want to see that happen.
No.
I don't want to see anybody wearing a mask for 8 hours a day unless they really have to for some reason.
It's a bit like those people that sew their mouths up. You know, I don't really fancy like that sort of direct action. Surely it'd be better just to not send your kid to school, wouldn't it?
Well, or just say your child is exempt. One of mine gets a headache from wearing a mask all day, so I've said he's exempt.
But this is what I'm saying,
he's
though.
not going to wear it.
What we're seeing now, though, is schools being really hard line on it and saying you must prove why you're exempt. You must have a medical exemption. Now, outside, you don't get asked that. You know, if you're exempt from wearing a mask in an office building, you don't have to prove it. If you're exempt in a shop, you don't have to prove it. If you get on the tube, you don't have to prove it. Why should you have to prove it in school?
Yeah, I think the problem is the power relationship is so different for young people. There was she's a Guardian writer, Gabby Hinscliffe, was saying she doesn't think teenagers will be bothered about this. It's just a certain kind of adult. I think that's a really easy, sweeping statement to make. Teenagers don't feel empowered to complain and stand up for themselves. I mean,
Gabby hasn't been a teenager for a long time. I don't know whether she has any teenagers, but I mean, you know, that's a bit of a sweeping statement, isn't it?
It can be really hard for them to step out from the group and be different and be one of the only ones in a mask without a mask in a classroom. Yeah. That's a really difficult situation for
and an awful lot of the
teenagers.
kids are basically bullied into doing it. Let's face it, that's the word, because they're bullied by the school, bullied by their peers, because they feel as though they can't say no because they don't want to be the odd one out. You know.
What's actually really frustrating about this is that we're having a very illiberal and I think cruel measure imposed on children, probably because of the teaching unions forcing this and the government pandering to them. But the fact is, Mike, there's been a virtually unlimited budget for research during the pandemic. The government absolutely could have done cluster studies, randomised controlled trials for masks in households, which is where secondary attacks mainly happen, and in schools. They could have done it, but they haven't. And I know from one anonymous government insider on a COVID task force who spoke to me that the reason they haven't is because they know masks don't work. The research wouldn't show any benefit.
If masks worked, why is it that Omicron is spreading so fast when so many people are wearing them? And why is it that in all the countries in Europe where they've had mask mandates for much longer than us, they've got worse numbers than we have?
Well, you can just look at Scotland and England. Actually, if you look at the latest 7-day rolling averages, the nation in the United Kingdom with the lowest 7-day rolling average of case rates per 1,000 is England. And we haven't had masks in classrooms, and we've arguably got the most relaxed COVID measures. So that shows that masks everywhere aren't affecting the 7-day rolling average.
As part of Plan B, didn't they? They brought the mask back as part of Plan B. Doesn't seem to have stopped the spread.
Well, that's because they don't.
Because they don't stop the spread. You know, there can only be one conclusion.
No,
right?
I know.
It's not because nobody's wearing them, because quite a lot of people are, especially if you get on a tube and you see that. But, you know, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's just really shocking what we've done to young people. And I know something you wanted to talk about today was eating disorders.
Well, because NHS England has said that over the period of April to October 2021, 4,238 hospital admissions for children under 17 for eating disorders. Now, that's admissions to hospital. That means it's pretty serious, right, by that stage. Yeah. And that's up 41% from the previous year.
Yeah, there was a very sharp increase in the first year of the pandemic. We're going back in history now, aren't we? Oh, such a long time. And there's an eating disorder charity called Beat who said that they had the highest demand on their services at the peak of the pandemic, by which they mean the first lockdown. But this year, they're expecting the greatest number of hospitalisations from eating disorders ever. And it's very obvious to me, having teenagers and knowing lots of teenagers, that the impact on anxiety, on loneliness, this kind of really weird life they were living, is going to force an effect in other areas. And eating disorders is one of those areas for young people. I think that you're making a good point. The hospitalisations is only one part of it. That's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's probably another maybe 3 times as many as that who don't go to hospital.
That's people who need hospitalisations. Right. I've got a friend whose son went to hospital for an eating disorder. By the time you get a bed in a hospital for an eating disorder, it's quite bad. He was in danger of his organs failing. Wow. So you can have a low-lying and, well, I think low-lying is even the wrong term, but a milder form of an eating disorder that doesn't require hospitalisation. So I think the true number is probably going to be a lot bigger.
Oh, for sure. No question.
And all the funding for eating disorders hasn't been going into eating disorders either. I don't know
There's
where
a
it's been going,
surprise.
but it's not been going into eating disorders, and that's pre-pandemic.
It's
So
probably been
goodness
going
knows.
into giving people boosters, probably. That's where all the money's going.
Yeah, but talking about money, that's the thing is that you'll find that when these charities talk about the issue in the media, they'll talk about what they want the government to do and the money they want the government to spend. I mean, actually, I come around to the point of view, I just want the government to do a lot less.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we don't need NHS support for eating disorders, but there's two things here. There's treating the problem once we got it, and then there's tackling the root cause. The root cause of this rise in eating disorders is lockdown.
Yeah.
Stop locking down. Never do it again. Acknowledge the harms. Acknowledge that we're social beings. And young people were hurt really badly by not going to school, not being able to see their friends, not being able to see their family, not being able to play sport, all the rest of it. That's the problem. But the charities don't want to say this. And of course they don't, because of their relationship with government, with funding, with media. But they're not talking about the root cause. The
And
root
also,
cause
for
is
some
the
reason,
lockdown.
by their nature, they have to be in favour of lockdown. I don't get it.